the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves have their first matchup since the Karl-Anthony Towns trade went down. Although it was only a preseason game, this game had its interesting storylines. We're going to talk a little bit about those. Plus, the New York Knicks could be interested in trading to Marcus Smart, according to Ball is Life. And the Pelicans have an interesting solution to their center position, one that I don't know how many people are going to agree on. And then lastly, there are some rumors around that Jimmy Butler could be the next star traded in the NBA. We're going to talk about all that and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host, Sir Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today, y'all. And I want to start off talking about this game that went down yesterday, the New York Knicks versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is a game in which both teams primarily played most of their actual rotation in this game. Not 100%, but most of their actual rotation. Now, on the Minnesota Timberwolves side, Mike Conley did not play in this game. Of course, Julius Randle did not play at all. But otherwise, the starters all basically played over 20 minutes, except Jaden McDaniels. You got 28 minutes from Rudy Gobert, 22 minutes from Naz Reid, 27 minutes from Donte DiVincenzo, 27 minutes from Anthony Edwards. And then on the New York Knicks side, basically all their starters played over 20 minutes. Even Mikal Bridges played 30 minutes. And this was a game that the New York Knicks ended up pulling out and winning by 5 points, 115-110. The New York Knicks now move to 3-0 during the preseason, which doesn't matter? No. But this was a fun game to watch when you look at kind of the battle between the game and things like that. Jalen Brunson led the New York Knicks in scoring with 24 points. And then other than that, it was kind of all spread around like you kind of expect to happen with the Knicks this year. Mikal Bridges with 15 points. OG Anunoby with 19 points. Karl-Anthony Towns with 16 points and 16 rebounds as well, and 3 steals, stepping up big time for that New York Knicks team. Josh Hart, even though he played 25 minutes, didn't take a single shot. But he did have 4 rebounds, 3 assists in the game as well, 3 personal fouls, but he had a plus-minus of +4. And then you look at McBride with 12 points, Campaign with 12 points, Landry Shamet with 13 points as well to round out that team. And then on the side of the Minnesota Timberwolves, Anthony Edwards scored 31 points in this game, looking absolutely great, and only 19 shots he did that in. Donte DiVincenzo went 6 of 11 for 15 points. Naz Reid with 15 points as well. Rudy Gobert with 10 rebounds, 9 points in this one. Overall, this was just a fun game. One of the more entertaining games you're going to watch when it comes down to preseason games in the NBA, right? And you even had, is there a little rivalry brewing between these teams is one that you got to ask. Now, they're not going to see each other a lot during the regular season. It would be almost a dream scenario, not as far as like NBA fans dreaming that this happens in the finals, but like if these two teams were to meet somehow in the NBA finals, which I don't think a lot of people are giving the Minnesota Timberwolves a lot of credit to being able to maybe be a team that can still be as good as what they were last year. But that would be just a wild scenario to kind of, if it all fell down that way. And this game, when you have Donte DiVincenzo even getting into it with Rick Brunson after the game, and, it came out after the fact that Rick Brunson and Donte DiVincenzo are basically family. But it kind of adds to that storyline of just the Nova Knicks of what a lot of people thought it was going to be really getting broken up before we got to see this new version of it when it comes down to it. So, it is what it is when it comes down to it. But overall, right now, the New York Knicks and the Minnesota Timberwolves are just going to be an interesting storyline to see how they parallel over the course of the season and the direction and trajectory of both teams, right? The Knicks are trying to compete with that Boston Celtics team to be at the top, the upper echelon of that Eastern Conference. And the Minnesota Timberwolves, despite going to a Western Conference Finals last year, now after the Karl-Anthony Towns trade, people don't really view them the same way. Now, I do like the shit talking, right? When you look at Donte DiVincenzo talking to the Knicks bench and saying this is what happens when they let you run the show, like those type of things, like those are storylines that we all love in basketball. And the fact that it's friendly, right? You don't have any kind of worry, concern that is going to turn into anything crazy where it's going to be a brawl or anything like that. It's just the fact that we could have a rivalry because seemingly Donte DiVincenzo feels a type of way, right, about being traded away from the New York Knicks. And reportedly, he was already a little concerned about what his minutes were going to be with the changes, with bringing in Mikal Bridges to that team. And so they end up making a move to get a center, a position that they need. And it's just fun, right? That's what it really kind of boils down to. All the think pieces aside and stuff like that, it's just fun. And that's what we enjoy about basketball is storylines, is back and forths, is those type of things in the framework of competitiveness. And so that's one of the things that you really got to look at and appreciate, man. I really love watching this game. This was a fun game to watch, one of the more fun games I've seen over preseason. And as we get further and further along into the preseason, you could see more teams playing more of their starters, right? Maybe even sitting a little bit more depending on what the team is. But for a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves trying to work out their chemistry as the Knicks are as well, listen, it's just going to continue to be fun to watch, man. Listen, this was a fun game when it comes down to it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what that matchup looks like for them in the regular season again. Now, we also do have some rumors surrounding the New York Knicks that I want to get into as well. And that is that the New York Knicks could be interested in trading for Marcus Smart. Now, this one came from Ball is Life. Chris Parisian is the guy who said this. Said internal discussions about a potential trade for Memphis Grizzlies guard Marcus Smart. The Knicks reportedly had rumored interest in trading for Smart in the past, but no deal is imminent. Now, I do like that it's the no deal is imminent part because, you know, a lot of reporters are kind of irresponsible in how they report things, like things that happened before. And I do not think the Knicks are at a point where they're going to be looking to make any other moves. They gave up a lot of assets to trade for Mikal Bridges. They gave up more assets to get Karl Anthony Towns in the building, right? So I think this is a team in the New York Knicks that are going to try to see what they have here. Now, the Knicks have been a team that over the last handful of years have been very aggressive about trying to find the best ways that they can to solve this team, to get this team to where they want to be, to keep in every season, make some type of improvement for this basketball team. And I would not be surprised if they notice something may happen, but I don't think the Knicks' biggest need right now is any more perimeter players. Now, while Marcus Smart, we know what he can be defensively. We know when he's healthy, what he can be and what he can contribute to teams. And I'm not saying, you know, there have been some rumblings that the Memphis Grizzlies could look on to move on from Marcus Smart, but I don't think that that's something that's pressing for them, considering their health situation around them as well, and just what they went through last year. They could want that insurance before they look to make that type of move. And I don't personally think the Knicks should be looking to move anything right now, personally. But you guys can let me know how you feel down below on that. Do you think that the New York Knicks is a rumored interest in Marcus Smart make any sense for the team, for either team? Or do you think it's another one of the things of a writer slash a pundit kind of talking about something that they've heard kind of out of context? Like I said, I got to give him credit for the fact that he said no deal is imminent, because I don't think either one of these teams are looking to make a deal anytime soon. But hey, we can see what happens there. Weirder things have happened in the NBA. That's kind of always my response to things, because as much as some things just don't make sense for some teams to do, we still see teams do. And that's just what it comes down to. And that brings us to our next topic, which is another weird thing to see a team do, but apparently team's still going to do it, right? As far as what we all knew coming into the season, that the New Orleans Pelicans had a hole at that center spot. Well, according to Shams, who it was on the Pat McAfee show, said this: he's going to be a hybrid player in regards to Herb Jones. He's going to play the 4 and maybe some 5. I'm told Herb Jones is essentially going to serve as the starting center. Now, Herb Jones, while a fierce defender, I like Herb Jones a lot. I like the potential that he brings. I like a lot of, not the potential, the skill set that he brings to NBA teams. 6'7", 206 pounds. He's going into his 4th year. He's averaged 11 points per game on 49, basically 50% shooting, and 3.6 rebounds, 1.4 steals last season. And he did land on an NBA all-defensive first team as well. And he finished 5th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. Herb Jones is an asset. And I don't want to make any mistake about that, especially to a New Orleans Pelicans team. He's definitely a huge asset. But if you're moving forward and you have to decide between a Daniel Tice or Herb Jones at center, is that the best situation? Now, I get it. We're moving towards positionless basketball. That is all the rave. That is all the talk. That is everything that's going on right now. Positionless basketball is where the NBA is going. Now, they do have Yves Missy down there as well, who is a young player in this past draft that I actually am pretty damn high on, actually in the long term, as far as what for his draft position, what he can turn into. Very straightforward center. I think he could turn into a solid rebounder, shot blocker, and just a big body for you down there as well. But Herb Jones starting at center for the New Orleans Pelicans is interesting, right? Because I think it would be the Pelicans fully embracing moving on to a style that is really, truly positionless basketball, right? Like you can switch up and down, all up and down that lineup as well. You still got Brandon Ingram there, who did not play in their last preseason game, but is a player that at some point is going to factor in. He can play multiple positions. Trey Murphy III still, again, and they're invested in his development. And so is it the best case scenario for the roster that they currently have to fully embrace positionless basketball, and at that point in time, just let the chips fall where they may? Now, Herb Jones is a player that can guard up, right? He can very, very well do that on that defensive side of the ball. And there are some offensive mismatches that it could create in having Herb Jones as your starting center, with his ability to hit a three-point shot, with his the ability to run the court, things like that. But you got to think, is that going to be something that other opposing teams can expose? And the thing that I always look at when it comes down to stuff like this as well is that I look at things in the framework of, you have regular season basketball, you have playoff basketball. And playoff basketball can be, depending on the matchup, a lot different than what you run in the regular season. And so if the Pelicans are going into the playoffs and Herb Jones is their starting center for a team that just is focusing on the Pelicans and exploiting any mismatches or any opportunities that are there, will having Herb Jones at center put you in a position where that can be exploited even easier for you? And that's the question that has to be asked for the Pelicans, and maybe they have a fix for that. Maybe it's a battle between Pitt and Zion there on centers and things like that, because you still got to guard Zion Williamson, right? You still got to do that. You got to put a big body on him. When Daniel Tice is in the game as well, you got to also look at some things there as well. So it's not like the Pelicans don't have other looks that they can go to once the playoffs start. It's just something that I'm looking at and saying, all right, okay, what are we doing here? Because I like a lot of this Pelicans team. I do. And, I like Herb Jones a lot as well. He's not a player that you always are looking for the offensive production, but he is a player that can always bring something for you, right? And so the Pelicans and how they balance their style with Zion running a truly positionless team, things like that, with already CJ McCollum, and, they got DeJounte Murray there, who, is going to slide into that one position. But this is a team that's roster just doesn't make the most sense, right? When you look at the individual pieces and how you have to best fit those guys together to play your best guys. And that's ultimately what the name of the game is here. You have to play your best guys. And so to do that, it may get into a position where you have to play those players in weird-ass positions. And that's the question that I don't have the answer to. The Pelicans are paying people who are a lot smarter than me to make that decision. But I just thought that was something interesting to hear from Shams. And, as the Pelicans continue to look for a solution to their center problems, maybe that's the answer. And maybe I just don't see the vision. But let me know what you guys think down below on that. Last topic for today. So this one came from Tim McMahon, who said this: if you talk to people around the league, who's the next big name or star caliber who gets traded, there are at least some eyes on Jimmy Butler. Now, this is the latest in the saga of Jimmy Butler, Pat Riley, the contract extension that's coming up. Is it worth paying him? Is it not worth paying him? This is all what's going there for Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. And the Miami Heat have to ask themselves, right? They sit in a unique position where they can start pivoting their roster to be built around Bam Adebayo, which is something that a lot of people are calling for. 27-year-old Bam Adebayo, who still has, even at 27 years old, I still think, because he hasn't been relied on to be the guy, maybe has some that he has to uncover with this game. And Jimmy's looking to get that max level money. And you have to ask yourself, Jimmy Butler, who's currently 35, who does have a player option for next year of $52 million, right? If the Miami Heat are trying to reach a fair contract extension, what they feel is a fair contract extension with Jimmy Butler, and they cannot agree to that deal, what else are they supposed to do? You have a roster that, in my opinion, if you do want to go younger, you're kind of slated to do that, right? And the Miami Heat also have to look at the fact of their cap situation, right? So they next season are $215,000 below the first tax apron. Now, the following year, they can be $105 million below the tax apron, but next year they can get even more than that if they do trade Jimmy Butler and they're able to get mainly expiring or not have to match the salary one for one. And that's where the Miami Heat have to do. It's a business aspect in this as well. And you have to look at your team and ask yourself, if you extend Jimmy Butler for the money that he reportedly wants, it's all rumors at this point, can you realistically still field a team that is going to be able to get over the hump in the Eastern Conference? Now, if you do eliminate Jimmy Butler from that and they do move on from Jimmy, you got Bam, you got Tyler Hero, you got Duncan Robinson, you still got Khalil Ware, who you just drafted as well, Jaime Jaquez, who played really good for you last year, Nikola Jovic, who's looking like he may be ready to take that next step up for you. You got young guys on this roster, and those guys are all still under contract heading into the year that Jimmy Butler's contract comes off the books. And that is what the Miami Heat have to look at. When it's not just about Jimmy and doing right by Jimmy. It's also with the fact of still trying to put a team out there that can compete and can contend. And that's what you have to ask yourself. Now, there are fair questions to be asked on the other side of that. How far would you have gone the last few years if it wasn't for Jimmy leading into the playoffs, putting the team on his back, and having the performances that he performed? But he's still a player that also didn't necessarily give the best performance in finals, right? So the Miami Heat are an interesting case scenario in this because it's a thing that you can make sense in both ways. Now, the Miami Heat have been, reportedly hesitant to make trades and moving off Tyler Hero, moving off Duncan Robinson, things like that. They did bring in Terry Rozier last season to help them with their playoff push. They didn't get healthy Terry Rozier. So there's some things of maybe they want to look to see, all right, before we decide to extend Jimmy, what does this team now look like? With hopefully everybody being as close to healthy. Now Bam may be moving back to power, maybe moving to power forward with Khalil Ware being your center. Now, what do we get and how far can we realistically go with this team? And so I don't envy the position that the Miami Heat are in, but I do understand the position that they're in because you still have to think about the future of your team. And paying at that point, 36, 37-year-old Jimmy Butler, potential max level money, not super max, but max level money, that's something that unfortunately every franchise reaches that point at some time if they've built something sustainable for years, right? Is that when do you pivot from your core? And if you pivot too late, you can completely shoot yourself in the foot. If you pivot too early, you can be stuck in kind of purgatory for a couple of years before you end up making that decision. Before you end up coming back out of that. So that's the place that the Miami Heat have to ask themselves, and what do they want to avoid? And how realistic is the chance that they stay a team that can be relatively good, right? And I think looking at this core here that they can do that. And a lot of people, like I said, have been calling for them to build around Bam to see what Bam Adebayo can really be for this Miami Heat team if he's the guy that you build the team around. Now, one of the risks of that as well is that you can find out that certain players are people that you build with, not necessarily players that you can build around. And that's the question that the Miami Heat have to ask themselves. Is Bam Adebayo that player and averaging 22 points per game last season, almost 10 rebounds, 49% shooting from the field? Is he a guy that you can build around that then can get you where you need to go? That's the question that Miami Heat have to ask themselves. And that's a question that, listen, I don't have the answer to. I don't know, right? They don't pay me for that. I don't know. I can't tell you, but I will say this. It's a fair question to ask, and it's not an envious position to be in. In some ways, it is envious because you still have a lot of teams. If they moved off of the player that's been perceived as their best player for a handful of years, you're automatically assuming that this team is going to take such a step back that they may even automatically go into a rebuild or a pseudo rebuild. The Miami Heat are in a unique position to where enough of what they've built here and enough of their players are still young and still going to be under contract, right? To where they can convince themselves of rebuilding on the fly in the sense that if we do move on from Jimmy, we are still going to have the pieces that we need here to at least be a team that can contend for a play-in, a playoff spot, and maybe can go far with the right matchup. Maybe can go far if the right guys take the next step. You have a lot of young players on this Miami Heat team that you can hit or hope that are going to hit leaps and big steps over the next 2 or 3 years, right? You got Haize that showed you a lot last year. He is 23 years old already, but again, NBA growth is different. You still got Nikola Jovic, who's only 21 years old heading into his third season in the NBA. You got Khalil Ware, who showed you a lot in Summer League and has been pretty solid in preseason so far. So you have those players that you can look at and say, hey, we feel like we have something here in these guys. And even without them taking a step up, we still feel we can compete for playoff spots. But if they do make that next step, these are guys that we think are going to be able to perform for us. And so that's the question that the Miami Heat have to ask themselves when they prepare to move on from Jimmy Butler, if they're preparing to move on from Jimmy Butler. But I want to hear from you guys on this one. When you hear that the Miami Heat could be looking to move on from Jimmy Butler due to the discrepancy and how they disagree on the contract situation, do you think that it's right for the Miami Heat to go ahead and maybe look to move Jimmy Butler at this year's trade deadline, or do you think they should hold on to it, push it off, hope he's going to pick up his player option next year, and then maybe work out something going into next season? Let me know what you guys think on all that down below. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, The number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago, for everything basketball related, thanks to you guys. And I'll see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.